welcome to the Movieception show. My name is Fariba, and let me first off say Happy New Year to all of you, and thank you for joining me on my very first video of 2023. And what better way to start off 2023 than to talk about the most anticipated movies of 2023? And yeah, let me just say that having compiled this whole list, there are definitely some great offerings of 2023, and I can't really wait to get down right into it. So, yeah, without further ado, let me tell you what I believe are the most anticipated movies of the year. And before I get right down to it, let me just say that after having seen the list of all the movies that are coming out, at least some of the more official ones, there are definitely a lot of great offerings. As I mentioned before, it was actually very hard to really just get down to the top 10 list for this list, just because there's so many promising and very interesting movies coming out that I believe are worth investing my time on. So even though they may not be on my list, I do want to quickly mention them. I do want to mention that just missed the top 10 list is Megan. This actually is coming out this week, so the wait is not going to be too long. I already have my tickets to go check out Megan, but this movie has definitely caught the attention of a lot of people once the trailers had dropped, the first and second one. It definitely has a bit more of that evolved concept of like a haunted doll, creepy doll type of film that we've seen in films like Chucky and Annabelle. And this is kind of the vibe that we get in Megan. Though what makes it so interesting is that instead of just a regular, plastic doll or just, maybe glass doll, we're now working with an AI sort of thing, which is very creepy but very intriguing. And having seen the trailers for this film, you definitely do get like a lot of campiness to it. And yes, I think the one scene, of course, everyone's keep talking about has become the memed moment is that really creepy but fascinating dance scene where she's like literally moving around in that hall. Um, Definitely gonna be looking forward to seeing this film this week. One I felt that was worth mentioning just because again, it's a movie that a lot of people are talking about, as well as the fact that the trailers have really kind of amped up our expectations for it, and has a lot of us interested to see what's really going on and whether or not it meets our expectations. So definitely going to be keeping an eye out for Megan. Another one I want to mention is Creed 3. That's, of course, sort of the spin off series of the original Rocky series that goes all the way back from the 70s. One of the things I'm really intrigued about with this film is not necessarily the fact that it is, of course, like, a follow up to the second Creed film, but it's really just sort of what they're kind of building up to. We've already been kind of going through this journey of what Apollo Creed has gone through, and we saw in the first film just sort of how he got into the gist of becoming this well-renowned boxer, considering he is a legacy of a previously well-known champion before, and sort of seeing that evolution where like in the second film they dissect more of kind of his, not his downfalls, but sort of showing his imperfections and his flaws and him trying to get, used to that. Now we're getting kind of more into the personal side of Creed, which is his childhood best friend, which honestly, to have Jonathan Majors play opposite of Michael B. Jordan, I mean, that sort of casting, that sort of antithesis played by these two actors, I mean, I think that really caught our attentions right off the bat, just because, again, you're seeing this dynamic between the two. And I think that already just from the trailers, you can see how both actors are really putting it all out in their performances for this film. So Creed 3 is definitely one I'm going to be keeping an eye out for. Just slightly missed my anticipations list, but without a doubt, worth mentioning. Can't wait to see it. And hopefully it will meet my expectations. So the next movie I do want to mention, of course, I mean, who hasn't really been talking about this? It is the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I believe we've now gotten 2 trailers now. For the most part, the reception has been pretty positive. The only sort of negative response I've been hearing, of course, has been Chris Pratt and his voicing. But I think that even aside from just sort of that issue, overall, the trailers look really promising. It really shows the world building, or the world that we know of the Super Mario games that we've seen as, like, as we were kids, and we're kind of seeing that kind of what we've learned, or what have we seen from the video games being put into a film format. And the fact that they really just, I mean, just from the visuals itself, it looks amazing. I think that that's already kind of a good sign of what this movie can accomplish and can showcase on the big screen. And not just that, but also kind of fixing a few things. For one thing, like Princess Peach, instead of her becoming the Denzel of distress, she seems to kind of have a bit more of an elevated role, which I honestly really appreciate. So there's a lot of right, and there's a lot more rights than wrongs going on in this film. Again, I think the only wrong is just, Chris Pratt's voice, which we've all kind of, addressed our criticisms for. But aside from that, the trailers have really showed that this movie is, it's really putting its heart out to be as authentic to the video games as it can, while also sort of sorting out a few, itty bitty stuff, such as some of the characters' roles and just how they're going to execute them for the Super Mario Bros. Film. Next one I do want to mention, and I know that there's going to be a couple of Marvel movies coming out, and for the most part, I typically put a lot of Marvel movies onto my list. This one just slightly missed the mark, and that is The Marvels. That's the one that's going to have Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, and Photon, or if you don't know who Photon is, that is Monica Rambeau. Basically, it's kind of like a whole team up sort of film that we're going to see. We don't really have a lot of details about what this film is going to be about, so I think that's kind of one of the reasons why it just missed the mark, just because I don't have like a visual of what's going to happen. Although we do know that, at least in Miss Marvel series, that somehow Kamala and Carol got, switched places for whatever reason, and the bangle will be just the key to just understanding more of what's going to happen in the multiverse saga. I think what happens with the Marvels is going to be very important moving forward. Again, we don't really have a lot of details about it, since we don't have any first footage of it yet, and it won't be for a while until, of course, Ant-Man comes out. But I do think that once we start to see all the other Marvel movies coming out, the Marvels is really going to perhaps set a lot of stage, maybe explain a lot of things. I hope they're going to explain a lot of things, but for the most part, I am super excited to see this. I think that the bangle is going to be the key to a lot of things. So I think that that's where I think a lot of the attention is going to be for. Although, again, it missed just getting into my top 10 list of anticipated movies. Without a doubt, it is a movie that I'm looking forward to a lot as we get closer and closer to its release date. The next movie I do want to mention is Wonka. That's the one. I think this is going to be the third adaptation or third film version of, Roald Dahl's book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. For me, I've actually have read the book, so it's really kind of an intriguing thing to kind of see how this movie pans out. For one thing, like, I think the biggest question is what kind of, persona, or what kind of, presence Timothy Chalamet is going to showcase of his version of Wonka in comparison to Gene Wilder and Johnny Depp's. Are we going to see more of like that creepy, sort of childlike version who, despises kids in the way that, Johnny Depp had portrayed his in Charlie and Chocolate Factory? Or we're going to see someone who's a bit more, self-aware of things, who has a bit more of a subtle darkness, but also, fully aware of what he needs to do with his company and whatnot, and that we saw with Gene Wilder, someone who's a bit more, full-fleshed and all that sort of stuff. Lots of questions about how this is going to pan out, of course, and just, again, kind of where Timothy Chalamet is going to, how he's going to showcase the the Willy Wonka that we know of, considering that we have already seen previous versions of him on the big screen. Again, that's probably going I guess once the trailer does drop, that's probably going to answer a lot of these questions that we have. But again, definitely intriguing to see this. I think that Timothy Chalamet is a very interesting casting choice. It's a matter of now just seeing where he is able to execute the character. So, one of the things I do want to mention is I do not have any DC movies on this anticipated list. I think I may have mentioned this before. I'm not the strongest DCEU fan. I do think that the DC comics are great, but in terms of the movies, they've definitely, at least in the DCEU, I'm not gonna address like the stuff like the Dark Knight or the the older Superman movies, but at least with the current DCEU, uh, it's just has been mostly misses than hits. It's just definitely been a disappointing journey in the last decade with kind of how Warner Bros has carried on with this whole franchise and just kind of the issues that we've been seeing in the last decade with just how the stories have been executed. They've just really been falling flat in the narrative of just trying to have this world building that is the DCEU. There have been a few hits, there have been a few misses. I mean, mostly there have been more misses than hits, but there definitely been some good ones like Shazam, for one part, and of course the Suicide Squad, the new one that James Gunn had done, not the 2016 one. That one was actually pretty decent follow up. But yeah, with everything that's been going on with the controversy behind DC films and just kind of the fact that Henry Cavill had to depart from his character as Superman, and just a cancellation of a lot of the movies that follow through. There's definitely gonna be a lot of questions in terms of what's going to happen. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that we're just gonna have to enjoy what is left of the DCEU, because there is movies like Blue Beetle, The Flash, Shazam, and all those sort of films that are still remaining, and kind of just seeing how they're gonna try and whether or not they're gonna use that and give us some answers to going into the new phase, the new era of the DC universe that will be under James Gunn and co. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to look into. But I do at least, even though I don't have any DC movies on this list, I do at least want to mention Shazam: Fury of the Gods. I did enjoy the first one. I think that was probably kind of its own outlier of like what's been going on in the DCEU. I think that was a very enjoyable film. It definitely had more of its comedic elements compared to sort of some of the more darker elements that we were kind of exposed to in the DCEU. But even with that being said, I think with the more humorous aspect, there's still a bit more of that subtlety, kind of just this coming of age story that we're seeing of this character, as well as just seeing how they're growing and evolving, as well as just going to the topic of family. So and having seen the trailers themselves, it looks pretty promising just to see kind of a bit more of that depth, what's going on with his character, what has happened since manifesting into Shazam, and what that has meant for his family. It'll be very intriguing to see this, especially because now we're seeing a bit more of the outer world, or the people coming in from different roles just coming into Earth, and just seeing how they would have an impact in terms of what's going to happen with Shazam, as well as the family itself. So definitely gonna be keeping an eye on that in March. Just a couple quick ones I want to mention. Asteroid City, that's going to be the film directed by Wes Anderson. Just I don't have a lot of details about this movie's going to be about, but I think when it comes to Wes Anderson films, they're typically pretty great. There's always something really subtle about how he puts up his stories that sometimes are whimsical in some ways, and also kind of being very original in what it tries to present. I think for one thing, of course, it does have a really star-studded cast. Like I believe Scarlett Johansson is in this film as well. Yeah, something that I look forward to hopefully this year. I know I wasn't a huge fan of The French Dispatch from, I believe it was 2 years ago. But again, usually I've seen more hits with Wes Anderson than misses when it comes to me seeing, Anderson films. And I hope that hopefully when Asteroid City does come out, that it'll just bring me back to, enjoying another one of Anderson's films on the big screen. And lastly, to close up, just some of the films that missed the list. Killer of the Flower Moon. This is a film that's going to be directed by Martin Scorsese. So it's been about 3 years since Scorsese has directed a film, and I think that when it comes to Scorsese's films, I mean, I enjoy them for the most part. They're very well directed, I mean, they're beautifully visual. I mean, cinematography is great. But of course, the big part about it is that it's very artsy. There's always that element of, it's not just about the technical stuff, but also just kind of the characters that make such the story interesting part of the whole, film. That's what, Scorsese is always about. And I think what makes this movie such, worth mentioning is that not only is going to feature one of Scorsese's collaborators, Leonardo DiCaprio, but there's actually going to be two collaborators who have always worked with Martin Scorsese. So we're going to see Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro in this film, which I don't believe this is I believe this might be the first. No, it may not be the first time. They did work together before, but this is the first time we are going to see them two working with Martin Scorsese, knowing that they both have collaborated with him for a very long time. I believe this movie is based on a book, and it's gonna be, I believe it kind of has more of the Wind River type of aesthetic, because it is going to be focused on the indigenous people, and I believe that's who the Leonardo character ends up coming across. That's all I really know about the details of this film. Again, I have not read the book, but considering just the fact that we have someone like Martin Scorsese, as well as two accomplished actors like DiCaprio and De Niro, I mean, for me, I'm already sold just to go see this film. Hopefully it'll be great. But yeah, that's one of the films I look forward to seeing, hopefully this year, because again, I do believe there's kind of this ambiguous situation in regards to its release date. Hopefully it will come out this year. That's also another reason why I did not put this on my top 10 list, just because there are some issues with its release date. It was supposed to come out last year, but it didn't. Hopefully it'll come out this year. I mean, it just makes sense to have it out this year, but yeah, totally hoping to see this coming out at the end of 2023. And again, just the people behind this film just is already kind of giving us good vibes of what this movie is going to convey. That was just a couple movies I wanted to mention that missed the mark in joining this list. So let's get right down to basically my top 10 most anticipated movies of 2023. And to start it off, at number 10, I have The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbird and Snakes. So I know this is not a very common one to see on a list, just because it is sort of, I mean, it depends on just sort of how the person is in terms of their, opinions about the Hunger Games. The reason why I put it, because I actually have been a big fan of the Hunger Games series, not just the movies, but I've actually read all the books. I grew up reading the books when I was in middle school. I mean, when the Hunger Games came out, it came out during my middle school and partly in the beginning of my high school year. So, I mean, it's one of the few times I really kind of got invested into a whole series before the movies themselves that came out, which is a very rare thing for me to ever do. But I think the whole concept is great. The interesting fact is that it incorporates something that is so dystopian, but also bringing in more human aspects to the story, showing just this revolution that, in a sense, you kind of see coming from, influences in the real world, whether it be the war aspect, the revolution, or even the romance, right? I mean, yes, it does have a lot of its teenage, elements or tropes, such as the love triangle, whatnot, that we saw in the Hunger Games series. But regardless, right, I think at the end of the day, it was definitely a great series to watch. In terms of the last two movies, I think that that's just kind of hard to deal with, because the third book was not great in general anyway. So not surprised that the last two movies didn't do so great, or weren't as well received as the first and second one. But I also think that that was just more kind of the issues with the book itself, that it was just really hard to replicate. And it was just the issues with that, I anticipate that it wasn't going to do well, or at least it wasn't going to be the greatest thing that we're going to see. But yeah, for those who don't know, of course, when it comes to the Hunger Games, there has been a couple of I think when it comes to Suzanne Collins, she has been, looking into just expanding on the world of the Hunger Games. And she did release a book just during the pandemic that was called The Ballad of Songbird and Snakes. It is a prequel to the actual Hunger Games series. So this takes about, I believe, 80 years before. No, sorry, not 80 years. That would be long before. Believe it's like about 6 years before, getting into the events that would be, with Katniss Everdeen. This is actually going to the 10th Hunger Games. So yeah, I actually read the whole book for this. This what really is. I know there was a lot of comments about how this book was going to be presented, because it is very focused on President Snow, who, if you all know, was the villain, the antagonist in the primary Hunger Games trilogy or Hunger Games series, and it's kind of just like, well, why are we gonna have a film that's based upon him? Like, why do you want to sympathize with someone who basically was a dictator in the original series? But I think that it does give us a bit more of an idea of who President Snow is. It dives deeper into kind of what led him to sort of this path that is, becoming the president of Pan Am. And not just that, but kind of giving us introduction of who was the first District 12 winner, which is what this story is basically about. So yeah, and the book itself was pretty intriguing, and for the most part, it does get a bit weird in terms of the romantic aspect, because again, like, the whole situation that the book, considering the book itself was focused on President Snow, or in this case, just not Coin Snow, but Snow in general. But it does give you a bit of an insight just to kind of how the games were created in general. Some of the more, like, the original aspects of what happened in the early games, how they were actually a bit more poorly done, the conditions weren't great. Gives you a different insight into just how the Hunger Games used to be before leading up to Katniss's her emergence. Something I'm really intrigued to see, again, how they're going to incorporate sort of just bringing the vision of what we see in the books and putting onto the big screen, how they're going to present that, how they're going to be able to replicate kind of the details from the books. I think that that's a big part of what the books have done, or at least what that book had done, to kind of give us an illustration of what happened in the 10th Hunger Games. And I think, again, when it comes to the casting, honestly, having Rachel Ziegler, I think she is a very perfect casting for this, to play Lucy Gray Bird. Because for one thing, the character in the book is very well known for the fact that she sings songs all the time. And I mean, having seen Rachel Ziegler in West Side Story, I think that may have just solidified that she was the perfect Lucy for this film. So definitely gonna be looking forward with that, because there is gonna be a couple, or if they stick to sort of the big aspects of what happened in the book, there are going to be some very, very, chilling scenes that we're going to see in the film, which I'm looking forward to. I do have a bit of, I am definitely kind of, a bit wary about the casting with Snow, just because I am not, familiar with the actor, but that's going to be a big part, just seeing sort of this dynamic between Lucy and Lucy and Snow, just seeing what happens in that film, what's, how their relationship is going to flourish, and whether or not they'll be able to, do in a way that doesn't necessarily glorify Snow, because he is, again, a villain, like, trying to show just a bit more of, like, that different, insight into what this world is. And I look forward to seeing that and seeing if they can, execute it well in the way that the books have done. Up at number 9, I have John Wick Chapter 4. I mean, let's be honest, like, when it comes to the John Wick series, they're just fun to watch, especially just to see Keanu Reeves just really just putting all his, energy into, presenting this character that is John Wick. So far, I mean, every single film has really just topped the one before, whether it be trying to enhance the action sequences or the visual aspects as we've seen. Like, I mean, the last film was, I mean, just the scene where we see Halle Berry and John Wick just, fighting off and fending off against some of the mercenaries. That was just mind-blowing to watch, of course. And now that we're still continuing off of this series with Chapter 4, I look forward to seeing what's going to happen here. Again, I mean, for the most part, I have a lot of expectations of what the action scenes are going to be like, hopefully they're going to be even more violent and even more creative and even more visually, fascinating just to see on the big screen. And again, I think when it comes to the John Wick series, like I don't think there hasn't been any miss so far. So hopefully again we'll see this, pattern continue on with the fourth film of the franchise, and once again seeing Keanu Reeves return to the big screen and once again really just showing off his skills, his energy as John Wick. At number 8, I have Greta Gerwig's Barbie. This is a film that I think a lot of us are just very intrigued about. Just for one thing, it is about Barbie, the Barbie dolls that we've seen and grown up with, whether we played with them or we saw them in toy stores. But for the most part, just like what we've seen so far in terms of the images and from the trailer, like I think we have a lot of questions about how we're about to, we're about to join into the world, into the Barbie world, and what is going to happen. Like, what is it going to do? What's even happening in the first place? The fact that the trailer literally had kind of like a mimicking of the 2001: A Space Odyssey sort of scene, where instead of just having the gorilla and the monolith, it's Barbie and a group of, young, girls playing with, American Girl dolls, and still playing the iconic 2001: A Space Odyssey music playing in the background, and just seeing, like, again, it's really intriguing from what we've seen so far with the images as well as the trailers with what's going on, to see Margot Robbie as Barbie. I have a lot of questions. Like, is it meant to be, just showing this, this updo, positive, outgoing Barbie that we've seen in some of the more, animated films? Because I think if when we look into the Barbie franchise in general, we have seen movies of them, more so like direct to video types of adaptations. But this is like the first one we're seeing like kind of at live action. And just again, how is Margot Robbie going to portray her? Or is there going to be a bit of this subtle creepiness to her? Or are we really just going to just explore the Barbie world in the way that we've seen in some of the more animated films? Again, a big question, of course, is going to be Ryan Gosling as the Ken doll. There was a lot of criticism with that, just because like a lot of people have been, questioning about his casting about it. Like, a lot of people think it is a miscast, but I'm not going to be the one to, straight up, deny or, object to sort of his casting. I mean, there had to be a reason why he was chosen to play Ken. I mean, Gosling himself is a really amazing actor. He usually, I mean, whether it be, playing someone more serious, like, the driver, or, and yeah, I mean, when it comes to Ryan Gosling, he has shown that he has this ability to showcase his humor the way that we saw in The Nice Guys. He can, show, like, surprisingly enough, he is able to show more of his humor that we've never really seen in a lot of his films, because he doesn't typically do a lot of comedies. And here we have just him sort of what might be more like a more comedic, more humorous aspect of Ken. But again, looking forward to that. I think a lot of people, what they do miss is that even though he may look like a miscast, I think one of the reasons why he may have been casted as well as sort of his history as someone who has been in the performing arts. He has, for all of you who don't know, he actually, has a history of dancing. He used to be in Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, alongside like his, castmates, I believe, were like Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, just to name a few. And I think that may have been part of the reasons that led to him being casted there. So again, the fact that there's been so much backlash behind Gosling with his role as Ken, I feel like that's just, kind of jumping to conclusions too much. Again, a lot of people aren't realizing that he does kind of have a history as, having, sort of like this artsy, background that isn't just about acting, but also in performing arts. And I feel like that may be the reason why he was casted with Ken. And as well as the fact that this is directed by Greta Gerwig. I mean, I don't believe she's had any misses yet. I mean, she's given so many fantastic films like Little Woman. I mean, I absolutely love Little Woman, Lady Bird. And I feel like without a doubt, like, this is definitely kind of going outside of Greta's comfort zone, but it definitely shows her really just challenging herself to do something beyond just, more smaller indie pieces. And I believe with Barbie, it's a much bigger film than she usually, would take on. So, a really great challenge for Girl Rig. I look forward to seeing this film and how, we start to kind of go into the world of it. Are we going to see, again, a lot of questions about whether or not if it's just going to be the Barbie world itself or there's going to be something beyond that, like the way that we saw with the Lego film. Are we going to see something more like that? Again, the trailer didn't give us too much away. I mean, maybe by trailer 2 we'll start to get a better idea what the story is going to be about. But regardless, I mean, already the first trailer already sold sort of this intrigue of this film, and I look forward to seeing Barbie when it does come out. Hitting at number 7 is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I mean, let's be honest, when it comes to the Indiana Jones series, it's there's always kind of the escapism when it comes to going to Avenger films, and just to see like Harrison Ford again onto the big screen playing Indy, it's just, I mean, it always brings us back to the nostalgia of it, as well as just showing again, like, Indy's like a really important character. He has been, iconic. He's really, put in a culture of what is the adventure films that we see nowadays, right? I mean, we wouldn't have films like The Mummy or Jungle Cruise had it not been for, Indiana Jones, right? So it's great to see Harrison Ford back as his iconic role as Indy. I do believe this is his last film, so it's basically closing off just the legacy that we know of, Indiana Jones. Definitely a lot of questions just because it's been a while since, we've had an Indiana Jones film, because the last one came out in 2009, and that was the one that did feature Shia LaBeouf, and he played his son in that film, and who, of course, is not going to be in this film. I'm assuming because of sort of some of the controversies that have been happening behind, Shia LaBeouf, which I will not go into, but aside from that, it does seem like they are transitioning sort of this narrative. Instead of his son, we're going to see his goddaughter. I wonder if this is kind of just like a passing of the torch in a sense, but without a doubt, I think what we've seen so far in the trailer is really promising. Looks like they're going to be putting in some de-aging technology. Wonder how much they're going to use that, or they're going to really go into a lot of the, the flashback of Indy's lifestyle, or it's just going to be small snippets of it. Again, look forward to seeing this. Already a promising film, and I'm super excited to see it. I know my dad's gonna be very excited to see this because he has basically watched all the Indiana Jones films since since its inception. But yeah, looking forward to it. Can't wait to see it, and as well as the fact that it will be the end. So definitely something to look forward to. Hitting at number 6, I have Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. So this is actually another film that's leading up to sort of this conclusion of a very iconic character. For this one, it's just part 1. So, but for what we all know, this is supposed to be the beginning of the end of what is Ethan Hunt's legacy before, he gives his swan song, right? And when it comes to the Mission Impossible series, of course, like, I mean, just to see how it has grown in the last 2 decades, like, I mean, who would have thought that the Mission Impossible movies were going to become such an extravagant sort of action-packed film that we've been seeing in the last, set of films that have released in comparison to, how it released back in the mid 90s, right? And again, like I again, for me, just like, I feel like each movie really just amps up the, the risk, the dares, the thrills of it. And I think a lot of it does, go back to Tom Cruise, who really puts his heart and soul into really kind of making everything as realistic as possible, as pragmatic as possible, trying to reduce the visual, effects of CGI, and try to be more practical with the effects, as we saw in Top Gun Maverick. And again, he continued, like, for a guy who's like literally in his 60s, I believe, or nearing his 60s. He has so much energy, and you can just tell that each film he really is putting like 200% each time that he is doing these films. And already, again, the trailer has been out for this film. Looks really promising. Definitely, again, like, I wonder what's going to happen in this redemption, in this installment. But again, when it comes to Mission Impossible, I don't think you can really go wrong with them. At least it hasn't gone wrong in like a long, long time. they keep getting bigger, and considering kind of that this is going to be the beginning, the end, it's worth trying to take in all that moment, and and realize that this is sort of the end of Ethan Hunt's legacy, or basically in that case, Tom Cruise's legacy as Ethan Hunt. So again, look forward to seeing part one, what's going to do before before leading up to its basically its conclusion. I believe next year. So definitely have that at number 6. Now we're getting down to just the last 5, and at number 5 I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So yeah, I do have a Marvel film in my most anticipated list, of course, and yeah, Guardians Volume 3, I think, when it comes to the Guardians of the Galaxy films, I mean, it's just really been a great journey just watching this team of outlaws, just to seeing the growth of the family of itself, like how they've grown to become a family despite sort of like this dysfunctionality that is this team, right? And again, considering that they're all outlaws, just showing this growth. We've been seeing how some of the characters are a bit more complex, how with their background, it makes them, rather than just being humorous characters or just being like the typical outlaws, there is something a bit more subtle about who they are. The sympathy of, like, giving us this idea that they are somewhat sympathetic, that they do have sort of this darkness into them that really kind of sets up who they are and why and what they kind of have to do to get through that journey. And we've been seeing that with a lot of the characters, whether it be Peter Quill and his mother, and just learning about his father, with Gamora and Nebula, and how their tumultuous sister relationship has been since the first film, and kind of how they've rebuilt sort of their relationships since then, or how their relationship sets up kind of the idea of who Thanos is and how he kind of had impact on them. And it looks like in this film, having seen the trailers, that it's going to focus a lot on Rocket Raccoon from the looks of it, just because again, we kind of already have sort of this idea of who he is, the fact that he was a lab experiment before becoming an outlaw, and becoming sort of not just companion to Groot, but almost like a father figure to him, in a sense, now that after having seen what happened in the first volume. But yeah, just from the trailer itself, like, I mean, I think right off the bat, like, there's definitely a bit more of this emotional weight to it. The fact that it's gonna be, it had more of that sadder tone than we typically get with a Guardians film. I think even then, each film has definitely been amping up just more of just this sympathy about it, just the fact that there's something a bit more nuanced to these characters, that they're not just outlaws. And I think from this trailer, we've definitely seen, from the way it's been conveyed, that it is going to kind of be a heartbreaking end to what is the Guardians of the Galaxy, because we do know that this is going to be the last one with the team. This is going to be the last one that James Gunn's going to be doing with the team. We don't know what's going to happen with individual characters, and whether or not they're going to continue on, whether they're going to appear in the rest of the multiverse saga, or some of them are going to be retired. We don't know yet. That's going to be a big question going into the film, especially how it's going to fit in with the multiverse saga, and what some of the characters will be, how they will be useful in terms of the overarching, story that we have, which is a multiverse saga. But regardless of that, I think knowing what's going on, the fact that it's going to be the final Guardians of the Galaxy film, it's going to kind of be the current cause for everything that's happening, as well as the fact that it has a really sad, heartbreaking tone, that it's really been showing off. Like, the trailer really did justice for it. I can't wait to see it. Again, like, I feel like let's be honest, like, we kind of have this implication that someone's going to die, and I mean, it's like, okay, well, can I handle it? There's a lot of things that they're going to be going into this film. We still have time, so time to prepare for that before getting to that moment itself. But again, Volume 3, just from the trailers, it looks really promising. Hopefully, it'll be better than Volume 2. and maybe a good sign of maybe how we're going to get into phase 5, knowing that this is also going to be the beginning of the new era or the new phase. Or I have Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania, and this one is a bit of a shocking one for me, just to put it as number 4 that high up. Because like when we look into the Ant-Man series in general, I feel like that's more of like a casual sort of series for me in terms of like watching it than being as like very excited with energy the way I would with Iron Man or Captain America series. But I think with this one, I think the energy is a bit different. For the big part being that this film is going to really introduce kind of the real Kong the Conqueror. Yes, we did meet him in a way in Loki, where we saw a variant of him who we renown as, or who we call as He Who Remains. But that was, of course, someone who's a bit more, controlled, someone who's trying to, balance out the world itself, trying to keep that, law order of things, of like the time, and trying to avoid the nixes and all that sort of stuff, right? Whereas in this one, we definitely see someone who's a bit more on the opposite side, the one that we are a bit more familiar with from the comic books. Again, he is the villain, the big bad of what this multiverse saga is going to be about. I think that knowing that this character is going to be the big part, like the majority, like setting up just the overarching storyline of what is a multiverse saga, I think that this movie is going to be very, very crucial to kind of branching everything around us in terms of like leading up to just the main overall, story that we're going to get, whether it be Secret Wars or Kong Dynasty, right? And I think that with this film, like Quantumania is very important. That's why I put as my number 4 film, just because again it is setting up a huge character that is going to be played by Jonathan Majors, and just having seen the trailer and just this energy, this exuberance that he, not the exuberance, but just this versatility, and just kind of the way that he's portrayed on the screen, and countering Ant-Man, like you're really getting this eerie vibe coming out of him that, oh man, this guy is going to be the next big nightmare of what's going to happen in the MCU. And hopefully when the movie does come out, that it does do justice to really showcasing who Kong is, really showing just again the threat that he is, how he could be someone who is going to be a big challenge going into the Avengers films. But yeah, with Quantumania coming out, I think that that's going to be a big part. Like I think that's going to be just the catalyst of like, or just not just catalyst, but just setting up the big part of like, okay, we're now getting into phase 5 and phase 6, and this is going to be the film that's going to set up everything. Like this is going to be the film that is the blueprint of everything, right? And hopefully that will be the case for it. Again, the trailer has been very promising. We do get, again, the typical Ant-Man humor, but also I think that in this film there's definitely a bit more of like the sternness that, okay, yeah, Ant-Man can be funny and there can be funny parts to it, but knowing that Kong is going to be the next big bad, I feel like there's going to be a bit more of like this, they're going to not dumb down, but they're going to just, reduce more of that comedy that we've gotten in the previous Ant-Man movies and really focus on who is Kong. And not just that, but I think that with what the trailer have seen so far, I already kind of have a lot of theories about it. The fact that, the ring that Kong, that we see in the, like the kind of the world that we see of the quantum realm, the ring that we saw, the circle that we saw, it looks eerily like some of the things that we've already seen in phase 4, whether it be, Shang-Chi's 10 rings or Kamala's bangles. I think that there's definitely a huge connection to that. The way that we see the rings, it looks eerily similar to Shang's rings, which I believe, I feel like that's an indication that this is where we're going to start seeing connection to what phase 4 sort of set up. And this film will just give us an idea and just really go into the depths of what is going to happen. Again, like I mean, just talking about it again, I feel like this is a film that I think is going to be the crucial aspect of exploring what is going to be the upcoming story that is multiverse saga. whether it be going into Kong Dynasty and Secret Wars. And I think that because of how important it is, I had to put that as my number four. So again, I'm happy that this movie is going to be coming out in just about a month and a week from today. So looking forward to seeing this. Again, I hope that they really go into the depths of it. The fact that even the director himself said that this is kind of Avengers level film, so I don't know what that means. Are we going to anticipate some surprises, cameos? I have no idea, but with the trailer coming out on, I believe the second trailer coming out on January 9th, I feel like there's going to be a lot going on with this film. So again, number four, can't wait to see this. I think that this is going to be a very groundbreaking film for what is going to be the rest of the multiverse saga. Now we're getting down to the top three films that I'm super excited to see. And at number three, I have Oppenheimer. Honestly, I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan, so honestly, whenever he has a film coming out, I'm going to be there the first day. Whether it be, the sci-fi films or just something, a bit more, mellow like Oppenheimer. I feel like Nolan has really stepped it up in his game of really just showing the visual masterpiece of like how to really put in a story and display on the big screen, like the way he did with Movieception, the way he did with Interstellar. And even though Tenet is not his greatest work, I still think it was a good film. And again, him just doing, Nolan stuff, right? And of course, the Dark Knight series, like those have been masterpiece, especially the Dark Knight, like really hard to really top that film. And of course, with Oppenheimer, this is gonna be a bit more biopic, so definitely a different sort of genre, sort of vibe that we get from Christopher Nolan, because we don't typically see him do biopics. I mean, he did do Dunkirk, so that's probably the closest to doing something a bit more historical. But that one still, in some ways, has its fictional aspects to it. This one is definitely more drawn to being a biopic. It is going to have biographical aspect to it because it's going to focus on the guy who played a big part in the Manhattan Project, that basically was a crucial part of ending World War II, right? And already just the way that Nolan's campaigning or marketing off this film, just having that countdown to the film, and not just that, but just seeing sort of what we've have been seeing with the visuals of Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer. Already I'm sold by this film. I mean, not like I wasn't already sold with the fact that Nolan's in this, is directing this film, but just having seen the trailer already, like it seems really fascinating. I mean, again, like just the visuals, like I already got chills from seeing just how they're going to really show the moments leading up to the testing of like the atomic bombs and all that sort of stuff. And again, the casting is again just world class. Like you have Robert Downey Jr., you have Florence Pugh, you have of course Cillian Murphy, and then I feel like just having seen Josh Peck showing out of nowhere, that was a bit of a surprise. But definitely looking forward to seeing Oppenheimer again. Like I for me, I've never seen any when it comes to Nolan films, they've always been masterpieces. They've always been 100% and really showing the true visual beauty of what is happening in the film, whether it be trying to manifest of the story itself or the visuals of it, because that's always been a big part of how Nolan really presents his projects. Again, and with an Oppenheimer, just to have Cillian Murphy, having worked with him so many times and having been a supporting character, having him now have his own moment to play a big leading role. Looking forward to seeing it again. A film that I cannot wait to see this summer, and I already have high expectations for it. So again, very excited to see Oppenheimer and just how it's going to execute the biographical nature of that story. At number two, I have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and let's be honest, like I don't think there's anybody in this world who is not excited to see the sequel. Let's be honest, when we saw the first Spider-Man to Spider-Verse film back in 2019 or 2018, it was around there, but when the first one came out, I believe not a lot of us had anticipated this film to really just wow us in the most best way possible. Just for the fact that it goes into the multiverse, theme of it all that we've again have already seen in the MCU as well as parts of the DCU. But here it's like, wow, the way that they were able to execute the story and the whole concept of the multiverse, idea, and just having all these Spider-Man versions or Spiderlings coming together onto the big screen and really just showing this like visual beauty of what is Into the Spider-Verse. But not just showing just that, but the emotional weight of what's going on in terms of Miles' story, the way that he is, you know, building up to his own origin stories of becoming his own Spider-Man. Because again, they all have something, similar. They all have something in common that led to, who they become. And we see just sort of that growth with Miles in this film. And of course, not without the comedy. Like, it had everything, right? So it had the comedy, it had the emotional weight, it had sort of like, this pleasing feeling about just, again, watching Miles's growth as becoming Spider-Man. And not just that, but I feel like with what Into the Spider-Verse was trying to do, I mean, just to have like sort of different perspective that isn't just, Peter Parker, right? Because we've always seen Peter Parker's story, whether it be in the animated movies, whether it be the live action, but we never really got to have a different sort of lead, a different sort of like Spider-Man lead taking up the presence of this film. And just to have Miles having his own story finally being portrayed on the big screen and seeing just how he grew, I think that played beautifully into the film. And not just that, but just the music was just phenomenal. It really meshed in well to kind of this energy and this sort of persona that is Miles. Like, it gave us an idea of who he is, like letting us, understand who he is, and just to understand who he is as a teenager, right? And that played a big part of it. And let's not also forget the visual effects, just how, not the visual, I mean, sorry, not visual effects, but the animation, just how beautifully done it is. Like, it's just so original. It's just so, vibrant. I mean, there's something like there's so little faults to this film that I think that we all absolutely fell in love with Into the Spider-Verse. I think that when it comes to the Spider-Man film, I mean, I feel like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse has just became like Sony's opus in terms of like the projects of Spider-Man movies that they've really tried to showcase. I mean, especially far better than movies like Venom and Morbius. But this one, again, really their opus of just really showing the idea of who Spider-Man is. Again, we've definitely seen that in No Way Home. No Way Home has did execute the whole multiverse saga in just a really great manner as well, in a way that Into the Spider-Verse has done it. And so like, yeah, like going into Across the Spider-Verse, just to see again the trailer for it all, I think right off the bat, like I at least for me, I, as you saw in my trailer reaction for it, I wasn't, all the way, satisfied with it. Like, I wasn't overall, excited about it, just because I think that because the whole first half of the trailer is more of a recap of what happened in the film, the first film, all the big aspects really happened in the second half of that trailer. Again, aside from that being the case, I think that so far from what it has shown, like, I think some of the bigger, exciting things about it is the number of other Spiderlings we're going to see in this universe, sort of this hub, this community of Spiderlings that are going to be part of this multiverse that we didn't know before. And not just that, but having to see kind of a Spiderling becoming what may or could appear to be the, antagonist, which is very unusual but very intriguing, and just a really just mix on of like really changing kind of the vibes of what we know of Spider-Man, right? Just because we typically see him as a hero, right? He's a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who saves a lot of people, but here it's like we see a different version of him, and yet we don't know what, Miguel O'Hara's agenda is and why he's going after Miles Morales. That's at least something that we have an idea of what this film is going to probably focus on. But aside from that, from what we also see in the beginning of it, like, he does talk to his mom, and apparently, like, this is going to be a big part of him just really growing up and learning kind of this hardship as he is as he slowly becomes an adult, right? Like the same case that we saw with Tom Holland's Peter Parker in No Way Home. And I feel like that's kind of the vibe that we're going to get, or it's going to become a big part of Miles' character development in this film. And regardless of how they're going to try and do that, hopefully Across Spider-Verse is able to replicate just sort of that excitement that we got from Into the Spider-Verse. Yes, the trailer was not as I wasn't as all happy about, I wouldn't say happy about it, but I just wasn't as fully excited about it as I wanted it to be. But and it wasn't like the greatest edited trailer, but aside from that, I'm still super excited to see Across the Spider-Verse, just given kind of the expectations, just the way that, the impression of how, Into the Spider-Verse really just, met the expectation, exceeded expectations. And with Across Spider-Verse, coming out this year, thankfully, because it was supposed to come out last year, but it's now coming out this year. Across Spider-Verse is going to come out this year, and hopefully we'll start to see more of this world building that is the Spider-Ling world, whether it be in the multiverse, and what is really going on about it, and why, the threat, or the stakes are going to be even higher in this film than we would have imagined, right? And what this could also mean for its sequel, because the sequel is going to be Beyond the Spider-Verse, right? So again, lots of questions. Super excited to see this, and yeah, that's why it's my number two. I mean, again, a film that Into Spider-Verse really was a masterpiece in itself, and I hope that we'll see that continue on and be rubbed off on Across the Spider-Verse. And lastly, taking on my number one position, my most anticipated movie of 2023 is none other than Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2. Yeah, so when it comes to Dune, I've been super excited for just kind of the fact that this is not a franchise per se, but a film epic that is being directed by Denis Villeneuve. I mean, aside from Nolan being one of my favorite directors, my other favorite director is Denis Villeneuve. I've been following his work since, Arrival, and since then, like, each movie that he has, created in the last few years, like, they're no short of being masterpieces, in some form, some way. A lot of it's because of the visual effects, of the cinematography, and just the way that he is able to really, you know showcase the beauty of the story onto the big screen, and doing so, just putting all the technicalities of it. I mean, it's so masterful. Like, I've never seen someone as, specific and detailed the way that, and finessed in the way that, Villeneuve has done it. And I feel like with Dune, like, there was definitely a lot, because I mean, I have not read the book, but I know that when it comes to Dune, it's been one of the hardest books to really adapt onto the big screen, because again, it's such a huge, there's a lot going on in the story that, it's really hard to kind of put it into a single film. And instead of doing it in a single film, why not put it into two parts, right? So when the first movie did come out, I believe it was like 2 years ago during the pandemic. I mean, that film, I mean, right away, I completely enjoyed it. Yes, it was a very slow burn movie, which is very typical of Villeneuve's films anyway. So you just kind of have to get used to that if you are, if you're not familiar with Villeneuve's films. But when it comes to his films, they are slow burns. But I think that that's the point of it, to really just, organically set up the story, build up what is going on with the characters, and just overarching story of it, and building up to kind of what is going to be the grand finale of all that's happening in the film, right? That's the case with Blade Runner 2049. That's the case with The Arrival. And considering that part one is technically kind of just the first part of an epic, part two is, of course, going to really conclude what is going to be sort of that world of Dune that we saw with the Atreides house, right? So, again, with the first film, it was one of my favorite films at that time. Villeneuve really just, exceeded expectations. He really just showed, again, the beauty of Dune, not just showing who Paul is as, like, upcoming, leader of what is going to be happening in the Dune, world, but also showing just this, this very, not menacing, but really just dangerous world that is Dune, right? And just really setting up the technicalities of it, setting the setting, the location of everything, and the details of it. And it's just so pristine, right? And again, the first one did such an amazing job at doing that. I know a lot of people have, expressed sort of their criticisms about it. And I believe that's more so people who have, read the books and are big fans of it. And, weren't as satisfied with how the first film had ended. I think that for me personally, the way it was done, it was supposed to be done that way. Just, again, the slow burn was necessary to really build up just this universe of it all. And then the part two is really going to get down to kind of the big parts of what is that book. I am a bit familiar with at least some of the story plots of it, so that again makes a lot more sense. I believe the second part is going to be a bit more action heavy, so I feel like anybody who was missing out on the action stuff, or were like we're hoping for it but wasn't really there, looks like we're gonna get that in this film. And knowing again just the casting and just the people who are going to be involved in this film, whether it be Timothy Chalamet, Zendaya, now that Florence Pugh is going to be in this film, as well as Austin Butler. I'm super excited to see this. Again, when it comes to Villeneuve's films, I've never been disappointing with them. They've always been top notch. I'm expecting nothing less than that with Dune Part 2, especially considering that Part 1 was supposed to sort of be the exposition of what is a Dune world. And hopefully Dune 2 would actually, build up from that, set up everything that's going on, whether it be the action sequences or the character development of Paul Atreides and everybody around him. And again, setting up that conclusion of this big epic that is the Dune world. And that is it. That is my list of the most anticipated movies of 2023, the ones I am super excited to see as we get through the year. What do you think? What are your most anticipated movies? Are they the ones that I've, listed out on my video? Are there ones I may have missed? What are the one? Do you have your own, list of the 10 most anticipated films of 2023? Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.